The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Penn Foster's 2019 Student Success and Career Fair. My name is Virginia Festa and I will be your host and your presenter. Thank you for joining me today. We are glad you're here. Or actually, I'm glad you're here. I hope you've been able to maybe attend some other sessions that will be very helpful for you in your studies here at Penn Foster or beginning your career. We're getting ready to start our next session titled Help Me Please. But before we begin, let's talk about your control panel. You should be able to see a control panel either on your right or your left that has a place that you can either use your headphones or you're calling in. You are all muted at this time. You can have it full screen. You can ask a question. I would ask the question at this point, are you able, and go ahead and type your answers into the question box. Are you able to hear me? If you can hear me, please type into the question box, yes. Great. Excellent. Okay, there are a large number of you here today, so you can rest assured that I will get to your questions eventually. I will not be answering them individually right now. I am so glad so many of you joined me. If you are on a cell phone, you may not be able to see the control panel. If you are on the computer, it should automatically upload when you signed in to this webinar, when you joined me. Once your control panel is opened or expanded, you have the access to the questions box. Our session is being recorded so that you will receive a recording, and you will also be able to reference this in the future for your own help. So if you don't take notes today, that's okay. It's coming to you so that you can review the points that you're listening to today. Okay. Great. Let's go ahead and get started. The things we're going to talk about today are understanding how to determine a thesis. That's the central idea of every essay. It's slightly different than just a topic, but it is, we'll be talking about that a little bit more in detail. We'll be talking about writing a thesis statement, what you want to include, what you don't want to include, finding support for your thesis statement, making sure that everything that you're writing supports the idea that you want to talk about. And writing an introductory paragraph, writing a concluding paragraph, and then talk about proofreading. We actually won't have time for you to write a paragraph, but we're going to talk about how to go ahead and know that you can write a good introductory paragraph and a good concluding paragraph, and about the body paragraphs as well. If you watch sports, you know that Yankees had 3 games over the weekend, and they played the White Sox on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They didn't do so well on Friday and Saturday, and they did win one of the games. On Friday, the White Sox won 9, and the Yankees had 6. Saturday, the Yankees had 3, and the White Sox had nothing. And yesterday's game, the White Sox scored 5, and the Yankees scored 2. I bring this illustration to you because even though that they didn't do well on all of their games, they still had the same end goal. Their end goal was they really wanted to win the game, but maybe their strategies for meeting that goal were ineffective on Friday and on Sunday. So just like that, We have a goal when we're writing, and our goal is to communicate with the reader. We are writing so that they can understand what we're talking about, and sometimes we have to change a little bit of our strategies, revise our game plan so that our communication is clear. Just like Yankees will have to revise their game plan so that they win a few more games. I asked you, and I don't know if you were able to, anybody have an opportunity to read yet, what is a Yankee? But if you haven't had an opportunity, no worries. We're going to go ahead and read it now. And while I'm reading it, and we're going to look back at it again later, what is a Yankee is a handout that you have, and I'm glad that some of you were able to go ahead and read that. While I'm reading it, I would like you to look for these these five answers to these 5 questions. How did the author use the hook technique in this essay? The hook is what is used so that readers right away are grabbed and want to read, their attention's grabbed and they want to read the rest of the essay. What is the thesis statement of this essay? That means what is the main idea? What are some supporting details for this essay? And you could probably write these down if you want so that later you can come back and see if, oh yes, I understand this more. If you don't understand, that's fine as well. Transitional words are like first, second, third, next, however, therefore, because, in order that. I may have that also, transition words also as one of your handouts, so that you know what I'm talking about. And how did the author reconnect the last paragraph to the very first paragraph? And so as I read through this, go ahead and listen for that, and I hope you enjoy it. What is a Yankee? This is by D. Weiser. To most of the world, a Yankee is an American, anyone who lives in the United States. It's not always a pleasant connotation. In fact, Yankee go home calls up images of angry Latin American mobs protesting the oppression of American imperialist policies. To most Americans, though, the word Yankee means either the pinstriped New York baseball team or the Northern forces in the American Civil War, the soldiers from the north of the Mason-Dixon line. In time, though, the idea that the word Yankee suggests has shrunk geographically until it's on the verge of extinction. Perhaps the most famous Yankee of all, no offense to the musical Damn Yankees, intended has star billing in Mark Twain's novel Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. I have lived most of my life now in southern New England state, and I can assure you that there are precious few real Yankees around. Real Yankees might have lived in Connecticut at one time, but now they are from another place or perhaps another time. As television and other forms of mass media invade our homes and tend to diminish regional differences to make Americans more and more homogeneous, the Yankees might be one of the first genuine American characters to disappear. A neighbor of mine claims he knows what a real Yankee is all about. Years ago, he says he lived next door to one. It seems his plumbing was acting up and he actually removed the toilet from the floor and taken it out into the backyard to do some surgery on it. Now, he knew that his neighbor, who happened to be a professional plumber as well as a putative Yankee, was well aware of the fact that he was struggling to fix his toilet, and he knew that his neighbor was home, doing nothing in particular that day, probably watching from his kitchen window. But would he come over and offer to help? No way. But when my friend finally gave up and went over and asked for assistance, the plumber neighbor not only agreed to help, but he did so gleefully. He spent the entire afternoon finding and fixing the problem and helping to return the toilet to its proper place. And wouldn't accept a dime, of course. According to my friend, that's the first tenet of Yankiness. You must never offer help because that makes the person to whom you have proffered assistance beholden to you. and a Yankee must never be beholden to anyone. That's how the word for this concept is said, and so you must spell it that way. To be beholden means that you owe something to someone else. Not everyone in the world can owe something to the Yankee, but the Yankee must never, ever owe anyone else anything. And he can't really understand somebody who is willing to be beholden. Thus, he will not offer help. Oh, maybe in real emergency, he would be as good a Samaritan as anyone else until asked. When asked is another story. You will get more help than you can imagine. Help in great abundance, more than you could ever deserve or pay back. So if it's not that Yankees are stingy. On the contrary, Yankee is generous to a fault. But there is a sense of reserve that prohibits a true Yankee from offering help before being asked. This sense of inviolable space is paramount. Good fences make good neighbors, says the neighbor in Robert Frost's poem, Mending Wall. And the Yankee would never cross that fence until asked. Another friend of mine knows someone, a Yankee, a chap born so far north in Vermont that he's nearly Canadian, who comes over to help with his taxes every year. To repay him, my friend must resort to trickery, leaving something on the doorstep in the middle of the night. To offer anything else up front might tip the beholden scales in his favor, and that would be risky. That's what I think defines the dying breed of the American Yankee, an extraordinary sense of balance and reserve, a holding off, and yet, behind all the reserve, a reservoir of generosity and of friendliness that can be nearly overwhelming. So as we read through that, I hope you were able to find out how the author caught your attention, what the main idea is, what were some supporting details, did the author use transitional words and what were they, and did he connect the introduction to the conclusion as well. I believe that there are a lot of you attending today. A lot have signed up. Close to 400, I think, signed up for this webinar. I believe that anybody can write, and I say that based on many years of teaching adult learners to write in Foundations of English, English Comp 1, English Comp 2, and also because I had I designed a creative writing course for homeschooled students, and one child in particular, the mother brought the child to me and said, I want something besides yes or no, or just a straight answer, like what happened in the football game yesterday, or what happened in the baseball game yesterday. The Yankees lost, the Red Sox won. That would be the response. So the mother wanted the child to be able to write quality paragraphs. I would say at the end of the year, this child made the most progress of anyone in the course that I had ever taught, being able to write quality paragraphs and quality essays. The others improved their skills, but it wasn't such a dramatic improvement that I could just look back and say, oh, great. You'll have to log back in, and I don't believe you need a password. You just need whatever the link is to get you into the webinar. 3 things to consider before writing, and that is the subject. What are you going to write about? For example, the topic for this session is writing quality paragraphs. The audience is anyone who reads so the first thing you want to consider is the subject. The second is the audience. And the third is the purpose. Why are you writing? So the topic for this would be writing quality paragraphs. The audience are you, the listeners, who want to improve your writing skills. Sometimes And I believe there's still a question about losing audio. Sometimes if you go ahead and call in, you can get the information that way. If sometimes our computers, sometimes in a large attendance, they glitch out. So if you call in, you will still be able to hear. You won't be able to see the sessions. The recording will come to you. And the last thing is the purpose. Why am I writing this? You may be able to print out the PowerPoint, and I'm going to just keep going on because that I will answer questions at the end as much as possible. So the purpose for this is to assist students with understanding, practicing, and acquiring new writing skills through interactive models and participation. There are different styles of writing or genres of writing, and throughout your writing assignments here at Penn Foster, you will be having writing assignments that, they will say describe or compare and contrast, and that will be part of your purpose as you go forward. So there's many, many different styles, and we're going to talk about them, what they are really looking for when they ask you to just write a descriptive essay or narrative or things like that. First, there's description, and in this one, you're going to make as many sensory impressions on the reader as possible, that you're using all the 5 senses. For example, you may describe what it was like when you were home alone for the first time. Were you excited and yet nervous, scared, heard every noise? Were there unusual smells or things that you hadn't noticed because you were home by yourself, weren't ever home by yourself before? So those would be what a descriptive essay is doing. Narration tells a story with a narrative conflict. So it's not just I went to the store to buy a gallon of milk. It's when I went to the store to buy a gallon of milk, someone hit a lady in a wheelchair. Now you're going to wonder what happened. What caused that person to hit the lady in the wheelchair? Did the lady in the wheelchair live? So narrative always has a conflict that gets resolved. It may not always be the positive thing, but you want to know what happened. Illustration, and many times you are on forum discussions here in Penn Foster or any place else. They'll say, can you back up your opinion with some examples? So this is, they could be examples from personal life, or they can be examples from your experience or watching others, or from research that will support your opinion. Division and classification is a way of thinking that allows us to make sense of our world. Division is breaking apart a concept, and classification is bringing 2 or more related items together and categorizes them according to type or kind. And you may or may not do this. Sometimes you will be doing this with math and science, as well as sometimes you'll be talking about theories if you're in education, things like that as well. Then the next type are process analysis, and it's a technique that explains the steps or sequence that are involved in doing something. If any of you have ever baked a cake, the most simple process analysis is a recipe that you find on the back of a box cake, or the recipe that you might find in a cookbook or on line recipes. That would be a process analysis. Many of us love to learn how to do something, how to be creative or create something new. A process analysis would be the step-by-step instructions that somebody could follow. Comparison and contrast. Comparison is you're looking at the like ideas, and the contrast is showing the differences between the ideas. You also could write a cause and effect. That means that what happened to start the downturn in the economy. What really caused the downturn in the economy? I don't know that we're in a downturn in the economy right now. But what was the original cause, and the effect is downturn. Now, sometimes that we can confuse that, because all of us has been told from our mothers when we were young, or somebody that was watching over us, don't run, you'll fall. Now, how many times have you run and you haven't fallen? That's not exactly true. There is a correlation that when you're first learning to run and your shoes may be untied more than they are tied because you're young and don't know how to tie your shoes, that you could fall. But that's not the cause of your fall running. So cause and effect has to be a real cause and real effect. Then we have definition. That's an expanded definition of a term. Here we had an expanded definition of a term. What is a Yankee that we just read? Or what is a hero? Then we have argumentation and persuasion, and that's when the writer's trying to convince the readers of the soundness of a particular opinion or a controversial issue. Now, this one will also probably use some illustration to support their examples, and you may very well be told in assignments, would you argue the point for should we have timeout for young children or not have timeout? Argue your point and give some reasons, support your reasons from research. We have determining audience and purpose. Now, I want to tell you that I believe everybody, maybe you don't know it yet, but everybody has an audience. You're writing already, you're texting on your phones, you're on Facebook. So think of the audience that's the intended reader. What are you trying to communicate when you text or when you put something on Facebook? You have a reader. That's your audience. Right now, you're my audience not only in listening, but you're also my audience as you're reading the PowerPoint presentation and things that I've prepared for you. So think of the reader of your text, your Facebook post, your Pinterest, pins, tweets, and LinkedIn post. So our purposes are connected to the genres that we just talked about. Our purpose could be to describe, to tell a story, to explain, to compare, to contrast, to persuade, to inform, to analyze, to raise awareness, to argue, to show cause and effect, to prove, and to vent. An essay has 3 parts. And we've kind of already talked about these 3 parts just a little in the things I was having you listen for when we read What is a Yankee? It has a beginning, a middle, and an ending, or an introduction, the body, and a conclusion to an essay. The parts of an essay can be likened to this graphic. You have the introduction that looks like an inverted funnel, or it looks like a funnel. Then you have the body of the essay, which is the main, most of the paragraphs in the essay. And then you have the conclusion, which looks like an inverted funnel, or just a triangle. And so that makes up the parts of our essay. Think of an introductory paragraph as an inverted funnel. The first sentence makes a connection to the reader. The middle sentence makes a bridge between the reader and the topic of the document. And the last sentence states the thesis or main idea of the document, provides an overview of the document, connecting the first paragraph to the body of the body paragraphs. So middle, it's not just a middle sentence, it's middle sentences, because there may be a few more than just one sentence that you have to go from making a connection to the reader to actually coming up with your thesis. Now, thesis sometimes can be the very first sentence in a paragraph introduction, but mostly they're found near the end of the very first paragraph or the second paragraph. So how do you write an introduction? I know that some people know that they really need to get the facts on the paper for the essays that they're writing, but here's some things that will help you understand some ways to get an introduction started. Give interesting background information about the topic. So, and for example, with What's a Yankee, they gave us a little bit of background about what Yankee can be, the connotations. It could be, some people think of it as a very negative thing. Some people think it as the soldiers in the Civil War. So that kind of gives you some historical background. They ask a question about the topic. That's another way to start your introduction. You can begin with a quotation that relates to or can be related to the topic. Share a short story related to the topic. Or share a surprising fact or puzzling statement about the topic. When you want to write the thesis statement, now you have your introduction, but also in the introduction goes the thesis statement. There's 3 parts of the thesis statement that have to be included in the introduction. It has to be a complete sentence. It must be the topic plus the opinion and 3 points of support. It doesn't really have to have 3 points of support, but this is the easiest formula for you to figure out what direction you're going to write your essay. You already have your 3 points of support that talk about the topic, so that those will be, the first point will be your first body paragraph, the second will be your second body paragraph, the third will be your third body paragraph. So that's a really easy formula for thesis statements. There are many other ways to write thesis statements, but this is probably the easiest. If you struggle with finding a thesis statement and how to write a thesis statement, this is probably the easiest way. For example, my topic is writing. So writing strengthens the mind by causing the author to plan, organize, and communicate. So writing is my topic. Strengthens the mind is my opinion. And causes the author to plan, organize, and communicate our points of support. So each one of these, this is going to be causes the author to plan, is one body paragraph. I'm going to have 5 to 7 or more sentences about this. Organize is another one, 5 to 7 sentence paragraph or more. If you're in Penn Foster here, they say 5 to 7. In other colleges where I've taught, they've said 7 to 12 sentences in a paragraph. And communicate. Remember, our end goal in the end is to communicate with the reader. We really want the reader to understand what we're talking about, just as we want people to understand when we're talking to them. The body of the paragraph, or the body of the essay, is a set of separate paragraphs focusing on each idea suggested in the thesis statement. It's a place where the meat is put on the bones. It is longer in length than either the introduction or the conclusion essays. And it is where the reader clearly understands what is being communicated. How to write the body of the paragraph. And just as I alluded to a few minutes ago, you want to use the points from the thesis statement. The most easy way that I said to set it up as points to discuss in separate paragraphs. Write a topic sentence for each point on the thesis in the thesis statement. Discuss in order of the thesis statement each point that was made. So, for example, I had plan, that would be the first paragraph. If I go out of order, it's confusing to the reader, so I want to make sure that I talk about them in the chronological order that I have them set up in the thesis statement. Here at Penn Foster, we have 5 to 7 sentence paragraph, our normal expectations. Next, you want to plan out each idea by listing supporting ideas or supporting points. Arrange the ideas in logical manner, first, second, third, time, important, what, put the very most important at the end, the least important support at the beginning, and place. Where did it happen? Where, when, why, things like that, in logical manner. Some more helpful hints about the body of the paragraph. Each paragraph should have a topic sentence that discusses each supporting point in more details. Each supporting point must have supporting subpoints. And when planning the subpoints for each supporting point, be consistent in the number of subpoints included in each paragraph. This is considered one aspect of parallel construction. It is typical when you're writing paragraphs, academic paragraphs, to have 2 or 3 subpoints for each main point that you're going to use to support your topic or your thesis statement. If I have 2 in the first paragraph, I should have 2 in the second and 2 in the third. I typically would try to keep to 3 in each, because that is a much more well-organized essay and supported essay. But 2 is okay. Whatever the number is, you must have it consistent. And parallel construction is an important thing to make sure that you're doing when you're writing. Next, use your pre-planning points to write the essay. Pre-planning could be an essay map, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You also have this as a handout for yourself or an outline. Some of you also may have done old school things where you did outlines, and nothing the matter with using an outline. It's not everybody uses them now, and either way, it's organizing your ideas. The number of paragraphs are dictated by the complexity, the inclusiveness, and the author's purpose. A short essay is usually 3 to 5 body paragraphs, plus an introduction and a conclusion. As you are maybe required maybe later at some point to write a 10-page paper, there will be many more than 3 to 5 body paragraphs in your essay. But you will still have an introduction and a conclusion. You want to transition your words to help the reader make connections. Like I said before, in order, that, therefore, however. So, the next is, and if you can't see this well on your screen, there is a handout that you can download. It's called a mind map. So right in the center, as you look at your the mind map, is kind of the topic they're writing about. 10 reasons not to mind map. Well, here are some things that they're going to write about in their paper. Some ideas. It's scary. It's kid stuff. It's not practical. It takes too long. I'm a linear thinker. It's useless. It's unprofessional. It's difficult. And I can't draw. These are ideas that could come to your mind about writing. And they could use each one of these ideas in developing their paragraphs. Are there some related ideas that they could put in the same paragraph? So that's one way that you can go ahead and organize your pre-writing so that you actually are able to make sure that you're connecting with the audience when you write. And I am saying, yes, do some kind of pre-planning so that you have organized writing. And less revision in the end. Also, you could use the outline, like I said before, and if this works for you, excellent. I use both. Probably I use the outline more, but I have used both, and it just depends on my purpose and my audience, which one I'm going to be using. So again, put your title at the top, your purpose, why are you writing this, then your introduction, what's your hook, your transition, and your thesis statement. Your first supporting detail, and you'll notice that I have 3 subpoints for each of the paragraphs or the details that I'm going to talk about on each. I'm sorry, I went too far. For each of these points, and then I have my conclusion. And in the conclusion, I'm going to synthesize or make a conclusion of the thesis, restate the main topic and subtopic, tie back to the hook, end with a bang, something to think about, or a call to attention. You could use any of these at the end. Don't introduce something new, however, in your conclusion. And your concluding paragraph. How to write a concluding paragraph. It's often organized like an upside-down introductory paragraph. The first sentences may restate the thesis or main idea of the summary. The middle sentences may briefly sum up how this thesis or main idea was developed in the body paragraphs. And the final sentences may suggest a wider significance or future implications of the main idea. Some tips about the conclusion. Don't introduce any new information in the conclusion, because now you leave the reader hanging. Leave an impression on the reader. Make them think about the topic and its importance. Sum up the main points of the essay. It should logically follow the same order as the body of the paragraph. So in my thesis statement, I said writing strengthens a person's mind by planning, organizing, and communicating, or I don't remember exactly what the statement was. But I'm going to talk about them in the same order. I'm not mixing up the order, because if I mix up the order, it will confuse the reader. And my purpose is to communicate, so I want to make sure that I communicate. And restate your thesis statement, in other words. So in the What is a Yankee? He told you that a Yankee, in the last conclusion, he tied it back to the beginning, but he used different words to communicate that. So we'll be looking at that in just a little bit again. And we may or may not want, it depends on the purpose, to call the reader to action. If you work with children, sometimes you may want to call someone to advocate for the children, for better pay for the people that work with children, better education for the people that work with children. Those call for actions at the end is perfectly fine, because you have a different purpose. Okay. Again, we're going to read What is a Yankee? And this time, go ahead and look for the same things, and I imagine that you will be able to answer them a little more easily just based on our discussion so far today. What is a Yankee by D. Weiser? To most of the world, a Yankee is an American. Anyone who lives in the United States. It's not always a pleasant connotation. In fact, Yankee Go Home calls up images of angry Latin American mobs protesting the oppression of the American imperialist policies. To most Americans, though, the word Yankee means either the pinstripe New York baseball team or the Northern forces in the American Civil War, the soldiers from the north of Mason-Dixon line. In time, though, the idea of the word Yankee suggests has shrunk geographically until it's on the verge of extinction. Perhaps the most famous Yankee of all, no offense to the musical Damn Yankees, intended, has Billing in Mark Twain's novel, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. I have lived most of my life now in that southern New England state, and I can assure you there are precious few real Yankees around. Real Yankees might have lived in Connecticut at one time, but now they are from another place and perhaps another time. As television and other forms of mass media invade our home and tend to diminish regional differences to make Americans more and more homogeneous, the Yankee might be one of the first genuine American characters to disappear. A neighbor of mine claims he knows what a real Yankee is all about. Years ago, he says he lived next door to one. It seems his plumbing was acting up, and he actually removed the toilet from the floor and taken it out into the backyard to do some surgery on it. Now, he knew that his neighbor, who happened to be a professional plumber as well as a putative Yankee, was well aware of the fact that he was struggling to fix his toilet, and he knew his neighbor was home, doing nothing in particular that day, probably watching from the kitchen window. But would he come over and offer help? No way. But when my friend finally gave up and went over and asked for assistance, the plumber neighbor not only agreed to help, he did so gleefully. He spent the entire afternoon finding and fixing the problem and helping to return the toilet to its proper place. And wouldn't accept a dime, of course. According to my friend, the first tenet of Yankiness, you must never offer help because that makes the person to whom you have proffered assistance beholden to you. And a Yankee must never be beholden to anyone. That's how the word for this concept is said. And so you must spell it that way too. To be beholden means that you owe something to someone else. Now, everybody in the world can owe something to the Yankee, but the Yankee must never owe anyone else anything. And he can't really understand someone who is willing to be beholden. Thus, he will never offer help. Oh, maybe in a real emergency. He would be as good as a Samaritan as anyone else until asked. When asked is another story. You will get more help than you can imagine. Help in great abundance, more than you could ever deserve or pay back. So, it's not that Yankees are stingy. On the contrary, a Yankee is generous to a fault, but there is a sense of reserve that prohibits a true Yankee from offering help before being asked. The sense of inviolate space is paramount. Good fences make good neighbors, says a neighbor in Robert Frost's poem, Mending Wall, and the Yankee will never cross that fence until asked. Another friend of mine knows someone, a Yankee, a chap born so far north in Vermont that he's nearly Canadian, who comes over to help with his taxes every year. To repay him, my friend must resort to trickery, leaving something on the doorstep in the middle of the night. To offer anything else up front might tip the beholden scales in his favor, and that would be risky. That's what I think defines the dying breed of American Yankees. An extraordinary sense of balance and reserve, a holding off, and yet, behind all that reserve, a reservoir of generosity and friendliness that can be nearly overwhelming. I imagine that those questions may have been a little easier to understand now. I think that the main point is that a Yankee is a person that will help you gladly, but doesn't want anything in return. He doesn't want to owe anyone anything, but he'll be glad to help you, and that's great. Did he call people to action in that? No, he didn't call anybody to action. So we read what is a Yankee. We identified that, and it looks like I've gotten stuck because I'm going back to the same things I've just talked about. Essay writing phases. What are the phases? You want to plan, like we talked about. You want to think about it. You want to do some research if you need to, depending on your purpose. You want to write. When you plan, you can use any of those planning tools I talked about, the mind map or the introduction. Then as you're thinking about it, and if you were like many times you'll be thinking about things and they're a topic, and things from real life seem to connect with the things you're thinking about so that it's something that will make the writing more understandable for somebody. Then do some research and then write. And of course, just like the Yankees have to revise their game plan so that they win a few more games in the future, we have to revise our writing so that actually we're communicating. We still want, the end goal is, just like the Yankees, they want to win. We want to communicate. We have to edit. We look for errors in grammar. We look for errors in spelling. We look for times where we may have fragments instead of actually used fragments instead of complete sentences or a complete thought. And then only after that, we've done all those things, then submit. I know it looks like a lot of work, but anything that's worth doing and takes time and takes practice. And I'm here to tell you, I know that you can do it. What about research in the essay? How does that work? So, you know that sometimes you are asked to research, and so when you're researching and when writing a summary, you have to read the articles. Then you write a summary of the main idea from the source, and you keep the reference for both in-text citations and a reference page. Here at Penn Foster, I think if you're in high school, you're doing MLA format, which still includes in-text citations and a reference page. And if you're in college, you're doing APA format, which includes in-text citations and a reference page as well. For more help with citations, visit the librarian here on the student portal, and I've given you the link there. And also check out the writer's block. There's many good resources there to help you understand about writing. After researching the information, chew it over in your mind. Think about these things. How would you as you think about what is a Yankee, you're not going to, and I asked you to give me a summary, you're not going to tell me word for word what was said. You're going to just give me the main ideas of what was said. And so that's what you're doing with research too. You don't copy and paste and just plug it into your paper. You think about what you read and how does it support your plan that you have and the points that you're trying to discuss. If it doesn't support it, it just supports your knowledge, but it isn't going to. Don't use it in your essay. Be sure to use in-text citations. Otherwise, even if you paraphrase somebody else's ideas, you have stolen their intellectual property, and therefore you've not acted with integrity or honesty. You can't pass it off as your own idea. And just putting the in-text citations in the reference page is a little more work, but it really, using somebody else's ideas is perfectly acceptable as long as it's not your whole paper. It shows that you have a researched opinion and that it's not just coming from, I don't like today because it's raining, or I like today because it's raining. Some people like rainy days and some people don't. It's not coming from those type of opinions. It's coming from a well-informed opinion. Note that the in-text citations includes a condensed version of the important information. So what's in that in-text? The author's last name, the copyright date, just the year, and the page number or numbers where you found this information. Now on the reference page, you're going to give a more detailed account, and you're going to put this in alphabetical order. You're going to do the author's last name, his first initial, copyright date, the title, the city and state of the publication, and the publishing company. Now, if you found this on a website, you're also going to put that web address on there. Put your page numbers as well. So, as you're reading, to support your writing for a research paper, just keep track of this kind of information because it's so helpful for you in the end. It's less cumbersome than going back and finding, oh, who wrote this and when was it published and all those kinds of good things. If you are like, if you're going to practice anything, you have to get good at anything, you have to practice it. So I'm saying that you should, when you know you're going to have to write, start writing early. When you get into a new course or start a new course, what are the writing assignments? Pick them out. What are they looking for? Start writing early. That means you could do your mind map or your introduction. And then throughout the semester before it's coming due or throughout the year before it's coming due, you can find things that will help you support your mind map or your outline. Those aren't in cement, your mind map or your outline. You may find as you're reading and researching that maybe your opinion needs to change or the direction you're going to write needs to change. Now, if you're just writing an essay, to write an essay like to persuade or to tell a story or to describe, you may not need to do research, but still write early. Make an outline or a mind map. Do one section at a time. Get something down, and it can always be revised later. Years ago, when I was a young girl, my grandmother was trying to teach me to sew, and I always thought I was doing a great job, and she'd look at it and she'd say, "Nope, you gotta take that seam out." So then I'd have to sit there and rip all the stitches out with a seam ripper, and then try again. My grandmother wanted very straight seams, a straight line. She didn't want any zigzags or alterations. And it made for a better product in the end. It was it looked much better. It didn't look homemade in the end, but I had to practice it just like you're writing. Second is write a rough draft. Rough draft should never be submitted as your final draft. Since you're writing early, a rough draft should be written early. And I know we're coming near to the end, and soon I will get to some of your questions. Then proofread your rough draft. Revise and improve the draft, just like I had to do with the sewing. Edit, look for punctuation errors and a more concise way of saying things. Revise again, proofread. Let it sit for a few days. Revisit it. Does it actually say what you want it to say? If not, repeat steps 3 through 6 and submit only when the essay clearly communicates the main idea and supporting ideas to the audience. Revision. And like I said, this is just revising your game plan like the Yankees have to. And don't feel bad about it because people learn by mistakes. When I first started doing these webinars, sometimes I would forget how to close the polls and people would just have to listen to me. They couldn't see my slide deck. Do you think I learned from those mistakes? I most definitely learned a lot from those mistakes, much more than if I had just encountered no problem. So we learn more from our mistakes many times than we do from just instant success. Revision is something that a good writer does throughout the writing process. Every time an author considers what ideas to add or delete, every time a word or phrase is changed to make the essay flow, sound better, it's revising. For example, while preparing any webinar presentation, I write a basic outline 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. Then add and delete throughout the remaining time before the scheduled presentation. I review the slideshow as many times as possible to catch any errors in maybe spelling, or I used an incorrect word, or I left out a word. Sometimes hours before the presentations, new analogies such as a baseball game and the end game. That didn't come to me today, but that may pop into my head so I can connect with the audience that's listening to me. Waiting until the last minute will not allow authors to present their best work. When an essay is assigned in a course, begin thinking about it right away. Set up a writing schedule that allows for pre-planning, research, writing, and revision before the assignment is due. 3 things to consider to to improve content and style, and I know we're getting very close to the end. I will stay after and answer questions. Is the essay clearly and logically written? Is there clarity? Then we want to know, is it unified? Do all the paragraphs relate, or is there something in there that really doesn't make sense? It shouldn't be in there. Do the ideas flow smoothly? Is it coherent? Proofread, 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 and again I say proofread. Some of the things that I would say, I am bringing a slide forward that you can read as I talk. These are things that you could look for in your proofreading. One of the things I would say to my English classes is read it out loud. Read your essay out loud. Your mind has to read a little bit slower when it's reading out loud, so you don't skip so many words. Maybe you left out a word. Also, maybe you put in the wrong word, so if the wrong word is there, you may be able to catch it that way. However, that isn't a fail-proof altogether, because if you just wrote something, chances are, even if you read it out loud, you won't catch it, because it's fresh enough in your mind that your mind will make sense of it. So if you let it sit for a few days and come back and read it aloud, that will help. Also, if you have a study buddy, somebody who can read over your essay, get them to look at it. Does it make sense? Did I use the correct grammar? Did I leave things out that, where is it unclear? Be open to their suggestion. They're only helping you grow. They're not trying to be nasty to you by saying, oh, this doesn't make sense. Could you help me understand this better? They're trying to help you grow. And the last thing I would say is you could use a proofreading technique where you read from the very last word in the essay to the very first. Now you really have to concentrate on what you're saying. Word wrong, the, using, in, errors, avoid, and spelling. Correct, to, use, been, have, dictionary, and spell check. Now I have to concentrate, and if something glaringly is wrong, when I get to it, I will know it because it doesn't even fit with the rest of the sentence. And I've already told you that already, all these tips. We have a few tools that are helpful for us. Grammarly. Grammarly will help you understand. It's free. If you don't already have it, it'll help you understand if you have used incorrect grammar or the wrong word, or you haven't used correct punctuation. Another is, so you've got writing assignments, Creative Commons writing space. That is also helpful. In conclusion, I want to say you can write a quality essay by starting early, planning, stick to the writing schedule, using an organizing tool, researching and reading on the topic, writing a rough draft, proofreading the rough draft, revising as many times as necessary, proofreading again, revise and edit as many times as necessary, and submit only when it's clear, clearly communicates with the reader. You can do it. Remember, you can write a quality essay, just like the Yankees may have to rethink their strategies and revise their game plan. Their end goal is still to win the game. Your end goal is to clearly communicate with your reader. I'm putting up a works cited page for you so that you can go ahead if you're interested in finding any other information about writing. Here's some good resources. If you haven't already signed up for some other webinars, there's some coming up right now. Fuel Your Health, Creative Marketing, Building, Interviewing, Like the Boss. You may communicate with me at Virginia Festa at pennfoster.edu. And as I said before, I'll hang out and try to get back to you and answer as many questions as possible. Take a few minutes at the end of this when I close, please, and take the survey. It will not only help me, but it will help the fair organizers to realize if this is helpful or not helpful to you, if it will be a benefit in the future for other attendees. Thank you so much for attending me with me.